Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into something a bit grimmer. A world of plagues, punishments, and questionable porridge. We're stepping into what daily life actually looked like in the Middle Ages. And forget all those shining knights and grand castles Hollywood keeps showing us. Truth is, you'd be lucky to survive even a single day back then. Before we get started, take a second to like the video and hit subscribe, but only if you're genuinely into this kind of content. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always cool to see this global community. All right, dim the lights, maybe turn on a quiet fan for that cozy background noise, and let's get into it. At waking up in 1325. Congrats! You've just opened your eyes in the year 1325. The good news: you're not dead. The bad news: neither are the fleas. You're lying on what's technically a bed, some straw packed into a sack that was probably used to store hay, and smells like it. No memory foam, no soft pillows, no clean sheets, just a wool blanket that's crusty from never being washed. It's heavy too, from months of grime. A distant church bell jars you awake. It's the medieval alarm clock, loud, relentless, and with zero snooze option. You live in a tiny wooden hut with no windows and one room which you share with your entire family, and the livestock. Privacy? Never heard of her. And the smell? Think sweaty humans, stale ale, wet goat, and something fungal. Scented candles aren't a thing yet, and even if they were, they'd melt straight into your dirt floor. You stretch, instantly regretting it. You're freezing, your joints hurt. You're 22, which in medieval years makes you a senior citizen. Your spine pops like old timber and your knees grind like a millstone. Nature's calling, and she's not being polite. There's no bathroom, no toilet, no plumbing, no paper. If you're lucky, you've got a wooden bucket behind the house. If not, well, it's the street. Yep, folks used to dump it straight out the window with a shout of "Gardilou," which is medieval French for duck. But nobody ducks, ever. The streets double as open sewers, full of human waste, animal droppings, and liquids better left unidentified. Live in a castle? You've got a hole in the wall, a garderobe, that empties into the moat. Convenient? Yes. But enemy soldiers sometimes climbed in that way. No, really. Congrats, you've survived the toilet ordeal. Breakfast time. There's no bacon, no coffee, no fancy toast. You get a bowl of pottage, a lumpy stew of grains and root veggies left simmering for days, maybe weeks. It's not a meal. It's a science project. On the side, rock-hard bread, made with rye, barley, sawdust, whatever's cheap. You don't eat it so much as wrestle with it. Your drink? Beer? Yes, at breakfast. Because the water's basically poison. The alcohol's low, but it's safer than whatever's coming out of your well. Even kids drink it. Now, time to get dressed. Not that it changes much. You own one outfit, just one. A coarse wool tunic or linen shift, worn until it rots or gives you an infection. Underwear, optional. Hygiene, questionable. There's no laundry machine, no soap. You'd need to haul water from a stream, boil it, and scrub your clothes by hand. Shoes, if you have them, are just flimsy leather. Most folks walk barefoot through mud, dung, and who knows what. Cuts get infected. Infections can kill. And don't get me started on the bugs. Lice, fleas, bed bugs. Everyone has them. They're part of the family. You scratch constantly. Rashes, normal, dermatologist, not invented yet. Think you'll flash a bright smile and greet the day. Think again. There's no toothbrush, no floss, no mouthwash. Teeth are yellow, broken, and rotting. If you get a toothache, your options are pray, drink heavily, or yank it out with pliers. Seriously, your barber might double as a surgeon. He'll cut your hair and pull your molars with the same set of tools. Infections can spread. A bad tooth might literally kill you. So now, dressed in damp wool, half-starved and in pain, it's time to go to work. And for 90% of people, that means backbreaking labor in the fields just to survive another day. Here's a simplified rewrite of your entire passage while keeping the tone vivid and engaging, but in more accessible language. Uturandak working for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you work on land owned by a rich lord who probably doesn't even know your name. You wake up with the sun and stop working only when it sets. Your tools? A wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and your aching bones. There are no weekends, no time off. You work 6 days a week from sunrise to sunset. Sunday is a rest day, but only if you're not harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying that your infected toe doesn't turn black. The work is harsh. You plow fields by hand, or, if you're lucky, with an ox. You dig, plant, weed, and carry water until your back feels like it's permanently bent. No one cares if you're exhausted. No one asks if you're okay. If you're a woman, surprise. You also take care of the kids, cook, clean, spin wool, feed animals, and try not to get your husband's lice. Children. They start helping around age 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and a dream of surviving the winter flu. Not a farmer. Maybe you're a blacksmith, tanner, or barrel maker. Sounds better, but you're still working with fire, chemicals, or animal guts in stuffy sheds. The pay? Barely enough to survive. The perks? Occasional bleeding. If you break a bone, too bad. Fever? Drink warm beer and get back to work. You can't afford to stop. If you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, someone else takes your place. So you grab your tool, ignore the pain, and keep digging. In the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It's a slow, painful endurance test. Now let's talk about the weather winter. No heating, no insulation, just wooden walls full of holes. Windows are covered with cloth, not glass. Your fire doesn't help much. Wood is expensive, and collecting it might get you killed, literally. So you wrap yourself in your one damp wool tunic and sleep next to dying embers. Your feet? Always cold and wet. Your fingers? Stiff and useless. Frostbite? Just bad luck. Summer? Even worse. Your home turns into a clay oven. No fan, no breeze, and deodorant doesn't exist. You sweat through your clothes but can't take them off. Showing skin is scandalous and risky. Flies swarm your body. The smell of last week's goat stew fills the air. Mosquitoes buzz while your neighbors argue and babies cry. In the fields, the sun roasts you. No sunscreen, no shade. Just you, your rake, and heat stroke, which they call a bad turn. No matter the season, your clothes itch, your food is bad, and your next shift is always waiting. Welcome to medieval climate control. It doesn't exist. Thirsty? Water might kill you. Want a drink? Too bad. The local stream may look nice, but someone just dumped a toilet bucket into it. Or maybe there's a dead pig upstream. That water is full of germs. That's why people drank beer, even kids. It wasn't strong, just boiled enough to kill bacteria. Wine was for the rich and careless. Bathing? Theoretically, yes. In practice, nope. People thought bathing opened your pores and let sickness in. So most just didn't wash. Bathhouses existed, but soon got shut down for being places of gossip and scandal. Want to bathe anyway? Good luck. You'll have to fetch water, boil it, pour it in a wooden tub, and hope no one else used it before or after you. Rainwater, collected in open barrels where birds poop and bugs lay eggs. Refreshing, right? Water in the Middle Ages wasn't your friend. It was a gamble. One wrong sip, and you're sick in a straw bed, wondering if you'll survive. Need a doctor. Hope you like bloodletting sick. You need help. Too bad. Medieval medicine was more torture than healing. Doctors believed you had 4 humors inside: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If they were out of balance, you got sick. Got a fever? Too much blood. Time to drain it with a knife or leech. Sad or anxious? That's black bile. Time for a laxative or herbal puke session. Break a bone? No painkillers. Surgery was done with dirty knives. Tools were heated over fire, not to clean them, but for dramatic effect. Germs? Not a thing yet. People thought sickness came from bad air or being sinful. Stomachache? Must be your impure thoughts. If you got worse, you got more leeches, maybe some crushed bugs, and a priest to prepare you for the afterlife. If you survived, they called it a miracle, and the doctor took the credit. Hungry? Your meal might be poison. After a day of dirt, lice, and leeches, it's time to eat. But your food? Probably dangerous. There's no fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, and hope. Your meat has likely been hanging for days, covered in flies and maybe gnawed by rats. Bread is the main food, but if the harvest is bad, it's stretched with bark, sawdust, or even clay. And if it's rye bread, you might get poisoned by a fungus called ergot. It causes convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It's like eating moldy bread spiked with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables? Only if they're in season. And guess what's always in season? Turnips. Let me know if you'd like to turn this into a script, add visual suggestions, or split it into multiple episodes. Medieval food was, honestly, a gamble. Turnips were everywhere. Boiled.
Was honestly a gamble. Turnips were everywhere. Boiled, mashed, or floating in a thick stew that had probably been simmering since your great-grandfather's funeral. Fruit showed up in the fall, but rotted fast. Sugar was a rare luxury, guarded jealously by the eat to flaunt their stained teeth. Dairy was hit or miss. Fresh milk spoiled in hours. Butter and cheese lasted longer, but were crawling with bacteria. Still, people ate them because the alternative was chewing on worn-out leather boots. Seasoning? Forget exotic spices like pepper or cinnamon, worth their weight in gold. Most peasants had only onions, maybe some salt if they were lucky, and a whole lot of disappointment. Meals tasted like soggy burlap sprinkled with misery. But food wasn't just about surviving. It was a political trap. Hunting game belonged to the Lord, not you. Get caught poaching a rabbit and you risked fines, jail, or worse. Your dinner could literally cost you your life. As night falls and you sit down to your gray, questionable stew by flickering firelight, remember every bite is a risk. Yet you eat because in medieval times, food didn't just keep you alive. It tested your endurance. Then there's religion. It wasn't just part of life, it was life. The church controlled everything, your calendar, your laws, even whether you could read. Daily life was ruled by the sound of church bells calling for prayer, morning, noon, and night. Miss a service? That was a sin. Sin was everywhere. Bow wrong, eat meat on a Friday. Even lustful thoughts could send you to hell, which priests described in terrifying detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and endless torment. You couldn't read the Bible yourself. Latin was for monks, priests, and the privileged few. The priest's word was law. If your crops failed, it was because you hadn't prayed enough. Tithes took 1/10 of whatever you had, wheat, eggs, whatever. No possessions? Then you were spiritually and financially doomed. Holidays were holy days. No work allowed, but no fun either. They were for fasting, confession, and reminding you that joy was dangerous. Questioning the church? Dangerous. Heretics burned, witches drowned, blasphemers flogged. Skeptics were reformed quickly. If you thought life was tough for a medieval peasant, imagine being a woman. Everything was harder: filth, famine, fear, childbirth, social invisibility. Girls grew up with a single script: marry young, have children, serve your husband, die exhausted. Education wasn't an option unless you were noble and sent to a convent. Marriage wasn't about love, it was about alliances and property. Once married, a woman was basically her husband's possession, expected to work tirelessly without complaint. Complain, and you risked being branded a witch, and that often meant a death sentence. Childbirth was terrifying. No doctors, no anesthesia, just prayer and hot water. Many women died delivering babies. Many more survived repeated pregnancies, only to live in constant exhaustion and danger. Women who stepped out of line, speaking up, knowing herbs, or simply being different, were often accused of witchcraft. Even nuns lived under strict rules and were considered spiritually inferior to men. So you endured hardship, obeyed, reproduced, and suffered in silence, all while expected to keep a brave face. But the daily grind wasn't just misery and submission. Violence was everywhere. The Middle Ages were far from peaceful. Law was unreliable, and brutality was normal. Steal bread and you might lose a hand. Accused of lying, your tongue could be pierced. Gossip too much, and you might wear the scold's bridle, a metal mask with a bar in your mouth to silence you. If accused of serious crimes, heresy, theft, witchcraft, you faced brutal trials. Ordeals included plunging your hand into boiling water or being thrown in a river. If you sank, you were innocent but likely drowned. If you floated, you were guilty and punished. It was a grim game show where survival wasn't guaranteed. Executions were public spectacles: hangings, beheadings, burnings. Crowds gathered as if at theater, some even bringing snacks. Domestic violence was accepted. Husbands were expected to discipline wives and children. Street fights were common. You could be beaten just for offending a noble's horse. War was constant. Local feuds, crusades, and battles were everyday realities. Violence wasn't a breakdown of society. It was society. By the time you reached 40, you were practically a miracle. Average life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years, dragged down by high infant mortality. Nearly half of all children died before age 5, victims of disease, malnutrition, or bad winters. Survived childhood and adulthood was still brutal. Hard labor from a young age, worn-out bodies by 25, missing teeth and optimism. Women faced childbirth risks. Men faced farming accidents, violence, and plagues. Death could come quietly or violently from famine, disease, or ire. Funerals were quick and simple if they happened at all, just a shallow grave and a few prayers. So yeah, medieval life was harsh, short, and relentless. There was no retirement, only the sudden end. Forget knights and fairy tales, the Middle Ages were grim, cruel, and deeply unfair. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. Nobles had their own troubles. Cold, drafty castles filled with fleas, political marriages, and a high risk of dying young. Life then wasn't simple. It was a constant fight for survival. Life in the past was unrelenting. Everything seemed to take longer, hurt more, and carry consequences. From childbirth to even the simple act of chewing. Survival was the priority, not comfort or leisure. And if you ever managed a rare, quiet moment to dream or imagine a better future, there was little you could do about it. No real chances to rise in status, no modern medicine, no way to look up that strange rash online. Most people lived and died within a few miles of their birthplace, trapped in a cycle of hardship. Yet, despite all the struggle, people found reasons to laugh, to sing, to share stories, to fall in love, and to find meaning. Not because life was easy, but because humans are incredibly resilient. Even in the darkest times, they made room for joy. So tonight, as you slip into your cozy bed with running water, medicine, and central heating, maybe take a moment to quietly thank the modern world and the generations who endured famine, disease, and feudal oppression so you wouldn't have to. Long before she was known as Catherine the Great, the Russian empress, reformer, and icon of power, she was simply Sophie. Born Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she came from a modest German princely family. Her small duchy in Pomerania was far from powerful, but Sophie had something no noble title could guarantee: sharp intelligence, relentless charm, and a deep hunger for greatness. Her childhood was strict and cold. Her mother, Johanna, was a social climber obsessed with status rather than warmth. Her father, a Prussian officer, was distant and more concerned with discipline than affection. From an early age, Sophie learned to balance obedience with cleverness. She read widely, mastered several languages, and developed the art of observing people, skills that would serve her well in the ruthless courts of Europe. When the Russian Empress Elizabeth sought a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russia's borders. Peter, himself of German heritage, was seen as better controlled by a foreign wife. Sophie, graceful and humble, fit the role perfectly. At just 14, she was summoned to the icy capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, wearing thin German clothes and carrying a polite smile. Pushed forward by her mother like a pawn, Sophie had a different plan. She aimed to become a queen. To fit into Russian society, Sophie converted to Orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. The ceremony was public and symbolic, a complete break from her past. She had no way back. No one could have predicted the storms ahead: betrayal, revolution, empire building. Catherine's marriage to Peter was meant to secure her place in Russian royalty, but it quickly felt like a prison rather than a crown. Peter, the heir to the throne, was awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers rather than ruling or loving his new wife. Some say their marriage wasn't consummated for years. Peter idolized Frederick the Great and resented the Russian court that raised him, while Catherine embraced Russia with fierce determination. She learned the language, studied its history, and memorized Orthodox rituals. She wanted to belong. Peter wanted to escape. The Russian court was a dangerous place, full of gossip, paranoia, and ruthless power plays. Empress Elizabeth still ruled with absolute authority, but her health was failing. Everyone was waiting for the transition and scheming for power. Catherine was watched constantly, her letters read, her friendships monitored, her every step scrutinized. She couldn't trust anyone, not her husband, not foreign agents whispering in her ear, not even her own servants. Alliances could turn to accusations overnight, but Catherine was no fool. Quietly, she began to play the court's game. She charmed military officers, befriended scholars, and built a reputation for dignity and restraint, a sharp contrast to Peter's childish tantrums and disrespect for Russian traditions. Behind closed doors, she read the great thinkers of the Enlightenment, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and quietly shaped a vision not just for herself, but for Russia. A country built on strength, education, and reason. There was one major problem. Peter was alive.
In
Catherine was
1762,
stuck as
after
a
almost
powerless
20
wife
years
to
of
an
careful
unfit
maneuvering,
ruler.
Catherine
So she
saw
waited,
her chance.
watched, and
Empress
planned.
Elizabeth had died,
The throne.
and Peter III took the throne. But his reign was a disaster. Within months, he alienated the church, insulted nobles, offended the army, and praised Prussia, Russia's enemy. He reversed policies, humiliated the clergy, and even talked about divorcing Catherine. The court, already wary, turned against him. The army, loyal to Catherine, murmured behind closed doors. Ordinary Russians saw him as a foreign puppet mocking their traditions. Catherine seized the moment. In July, while Peter was away, she launched a bloodless coup. Supported by key military leaders, including her lover Gregory Orlov and his brothers, she rode through St. Petersburg, crowned Empress Catherine II, and secured the loyalty of the Imperial Guard. Peter, caught off guard, surrendered and soon died under suspicious circumstances. Officially, it was a natural death. Rumors say otherwise. Catherine was now empress, not by birth or marriage, but by sheer will and cunning. A foreign-born woman with no direct claim to the throne had taken control without a battle. But her greatest challenge was just beginning, turning that bold seizure of power into a lasting reign. Would the nobles accept her? Could she keep the empire united? Catherine knew that power gained by intrigue could be lost just as quickly. She needed to rule as a visionary, not just a schemer. She transformed from cautious conspirator to reforming ruler, redrawing borders, embracing Enlightenment ideas, and redefining female power. Catherine could have rested once crowned, but she had bigger goals. She wanted to transform Russia, not just militarily or politically, but intellectually. While Peter worshipped Frederick the Great in toy soldiers, Catherine idolized Voltaire and Enlightenment thinkers. She believed in reason, progress, education, and the idea that a monarch should serve the people, even as she ruled absolutely. She corresponded with Voltaire for years, praising him while defending her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court and supported his work financially. Behind palace walls, she studied law, debated reforms, and worked to modernize the empire. Her 1767 legislative commission aimed to rewrite Russian law, advocating equality before the law, opposing torture, and emphasizing rulers' duties to their people. Radical ideas in 18th century Russia. But Russia was a vast, feudal, deeply conservative land ruled by nobles who wanted their serfs exactly where they were. Catherine had to balance reform with survival. She abolished some tortures and expanded education, but kept noble control over serfs to maintain loyalty. Catherine wasn't trying to make Russia just European. She wanted it modern on her own terms. Reform with a velvet glove over an iron fist. Her ambitions weren't limited to internal reform. She expanded Russia's borders aggressively, waging wars against the Ottoman Empire to gain access to warm water ports, a long-standing Russian goal. Under generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russia captured Crimea and parts of the Black Sea coast, sending a message. Russia was now a major continental power. She also took part in the partitions of Poland, dividing the struggling Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth with Austria and Prussia, wiping Poland off the map and adding millions of new subjects. Catherine didn't only conquer with armies, she colonized with ideas, founding new cities, expanding trade routes, and inviting settlers to cultivate the empire. Throughout it all, she was the central force, reading reports, issuing orders, and shaping her growing realm. Critics called her power-hungry and imperialistic, but to Catherine, expansion was destiny. She believed great rulers were judged by their borders as much as their ideas. Catherine's private life was also famous, or infamous. She openly maintained several lovers, rewarding them with titles and estates as long as they remained loyal and discreet. One notable lover, Gregory Potemkin, was both a romantic partner and political ally. Some historians think they may have even secretly married. Together, they shaped military campaigns in the empire's southern expansion. Despite scandal and gossip, including wild rumors spread by enemies, Catherine refused to hide her relationships. In a world where female rulers were expected to be saintly or tragic, she ruled and loved on her own terms, making her both feared and admired. Catherine was philosophical about love and power, seeing pleasure as natural and personal ties as separate from governance. Her relationships were often strategic, surrounding herself with loyal and capable men, and parting ways when they outlived their usefulness, always with grace. But her reign faced serious challenges. In 1773, a major rebellion erupted, led by the Cossack Yemelyan Pugachev, who claimed to be the deceased Peter III. Though his claim was false, it inspired hope among oppressed peasants, promising freedom from serfdom and lower taxes. The uprising spread rapidly, threatening to tear the empire apart. Catherine acted decisively, sending professional troops to crush the revolt. Pugachev was captured, publicly executed, and his rebellion ended. Afterward, Catherine tightened control, realizing that Enlightenment ideals clashed with Russia's feudal realities. She prioritized stability, strengthening the nobility's hold over serfs and increasing surveillance. Reform became cautious, and dissent was crushed quickly. Pugachev's rebellion was a stark warning that power based on inequality could collapse without warning. By the end of her life, Catherine had ruled Russia for over 30 years, longer than any other female monarch in Russian history. She defied expectations, expanded her empire, and redefined what it meant to be a woman in power. Russia emerged as a true European powerhouse, its territory growing by hundreds of thousands of square miles. Her legacy extended beyond battles and borders. She founded the Hermitage Museum, amassed a world-class art collection, and corresponded with leading Enlightenment thinkers. Her court became a center of culture, art, and intellectual ambition, placing Russia firmly on the European map. She also modernized education, leaving a lasting cultural impact that outlived her reign. Here's a polished, clear, and engaging rewrite of the two main historical sections from your text: the story of Catherine the Great's reign and the discovery of the Red Queen's tomb at Palenque, suitable for narration or storytelling while maintaining depth and drama. Catherine the Great, the empress who rewrote power. Catherine the Great wasn't just a ruler, she was a force of nature. She championed education, founded schools for girls, and pushed for the printing of books. Boldly, she introduced smallpox inoculation to Russia, even taking the vaccine herself, a remarkable act of scientific courage for her time. But Catherine's reign was full of contradictions. Though she admired Enlightenment ideals, she never freed the serfs. Instead, she expanded serfdom deeper into Russia's vast territories. Her reforms, while impressive, were mostly top-down, designed to polish the empire's image without fundamentally changing its social structure. Yet her rule brought stability and ambition. Catherine understood that power was not inherited by divine right. It had to be crafted, managed, and fiercely defended. She ruled through sheer will, political brilliance, and relentless calculation. People called her many things: user, tyrant, reformer, seductress. But above all, she was effective. By the time she died in 1796, Russia was wealthier, larger, and more powerful than it had been in centuries. She left behind a secure throne, an expanded empire, and a legend that would endure. Catherine didn't just reign, she ruled with intellect, strategy, and an unapologetic grip on history. She was a woman navigating a man's world, reshaping it in her own image. Behind the grand portraits and imperial decrees was a ruler who read constantly, wrote endlessly, and worked tirelessly. She managed a court full of rivals, distrusted her son Paul, and mourned the loss of her closest confidant, Gregory Potemkin. She crafted her image carefully: mother of Russia, enlightened monarch, warrior empress, lover of the arts. But beneath those roles was a woman who had survived rejection, betrayal, scandal, and rebellion, and thrived. Catherine left an empire transformed, but her legacy raises questions. Could she have done more to end serfdom? Were her Enlightenment ideals compromised by politics? Was she a reformer or just a ruler? History remembers her by a title she never claimed: the Great. Not because she was flawless or kind, but because she took power and wielded it on her own terms, in a time and place where women were not meant to hold power. She didn't just wear the crown, she rewrote what it meant to deserve one. The Red Queen of Palenque, mystery and scarlet deep in the lush jungles of Chiapas, Mexico. The ancient Maya city of Palenque hides secrets beneath its towering temples. In 1994, a team of archaeologists led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez uncovered one of the greatest mysteries of Maya history: a hidden tomb beneath Temple 3, a modest pyramid near the famed Temple of the Inscriptions. Inside, they found a sealed chamber untouched by looters. The air hung heavy with centuries of sile. Silence. When they opened the stone sarcophagus, a brilliant red dust rose. Powdered cinnabar, a toxic mercury mineral used in sacred Maya rituals. Within the crimson haze lay the skeleton of a woman, the Red Queen. She had been buried with great care, her fragile bones covered by a jade mask, her body surrounded by necklaces, diadems, and ornaments made of jade and shell. Everything spoke of royalty, but no name or glyphs identified her. She was an enigma, one of the richest female burials in Mesoamerica, wrapped in mystery. Who was she? A queen? A priestess? Perhaps the wife of Palenque's greatest king, Pakal the Great? Cinnabar's vibrant red symbolized blood, sacrifice, and the life force connecting humans to the divine. To the Maya, death was not an end, but a transformation, a passage to the afterlife. The Red Queen's burial was meant not just to honor her death, but to prepare her for deification. Her skull rested on jaguar skin, a sacred symbol of power. Bone needles, obsidian blades, and jade figurines hinted at rituals, while ceramic vessels likely held offerings to sustain her spirit on its journey through the Maya underworld, Xibalba. DNA tests showed no direct maternal link between the Red Queen and Pakal, ruling out one connection but leaving many possibilities: wife, mother, priestess, or royal ancestor. The Maya world was complex. Royal women were more than consorts. They were diplomats, priests, rulers, and power brokers. Sakuk, Pakal's mother, ruled as queen regent, and issued decrees in her own right. Across the Maya world, women played major ceremonial and political roles, remembered in stone and glyphs, until the Spanish conquest erased much of their history. The Red Queen's tomb, rich in ritual and symbolism, speaks to a world where power and identity transcended words. Though nameless, she was never voiceless. She was a queen not only in life, but in the sacred eternal journey beyond death. Sure, here's a rewritten, clearer, and more straightforward version of your text. Compared to its grand neighbor, the Red Queen's tomb hides something more personal and secret. This sealed crypt, untouched by looters, is perfectly preserved. It was built deep inside the temple, only reachable by a narrow, steep staircase. Descending into her tomb feels like a symbolic journey into the underworld. The chamber is simple, made of cut stone and tightly sealed for over 1,130 years. There are no paintings or carvings on the walls, no story told through images. Maybe the silence was on purpose. This space wasn't meant for the living to interpret, but for the dead to transform. At the center sits her sarcophagus, made of limestone, like an altar. It resembles the grand stone coffin of Pal, the great king buried nearby. Pal's lid shows scenes of cosmic rebirth, but the Red Queen's tomb is more modest. It focuses inward, on her body, the cinnabar covering it, and the rituals of death. Still, some architectural details hint at deeper meaning. The tomb is aligned east to west, mirroring the sun's path from life to death. The small chamber feels intentional, personal, a sacred space for someone highly respected. Maya temples were not just buildings. They were bridges between the heavens, earth, and the underworld. To be buried inside one was to be elevated beyond the human world. The Red Queen's final resting place wasn't an afterthought. It was a carefully made shrine where death became transformation. Her bones rest in stone, her body covered in cinnabar, and her legacy preserved in the temple's design. The temple itself speaks without words, telling us she mattered. For the ancient Maya, death was not the end. It was a passage into the underworld, called Xibalba, a dangerous place full of darkness, rivers of blood, and gods of death. Only those properly buried and spiritually prepared could make it through safely. The Red Queen was buried wrapped in cinnabar, sealed in stone, and surrounded by offerings, signs of a royal burial. Inside her tomb, bone needles and obsidian blades suggest that rituals involving self-sacrifice may have been performed, either in life or at her burial to empower her spirit. Her jade mask was more than decoration. It may have helped preserve her identity as she traveled into the afterlife. The Maya believed the face was a mirror of the soul, and the gods needed to recognize it. Ceramic vessels around her may have held chocolate, maize water, or pulque to nourish her in the next world. Other items like stingray spines and shell trumpets could have been spiritual tools or calls to the gods. Burial was not just a farewell, it was a transformation. The Maya saw death as a cycle, death as seed, burial as planting, and the afterlife as rebirth. Kings and queens were seen as gods on earth, and in death they returned to the divine world. The Red Queen, wrapped in the color of blood and buried in a pyramid with rich offerings, was being prepared for rebirth. Noe. Inside, they found a sealed chamber, untouched by looters. The air hung heavy with centuries of silence. 1994ing itself, with every breath, she started to paint. What began as therapy soon became her language. And that language was deeply personal, brutally honest, and often hard to look at. That was the point. Frida didn't paint pretty flowers or polite landscapes. She painted pain, her pain, physical, emotional, and existential. Her earliest subjects were self-portraits, not out of vanity, but because, as she famously said, "I paint myself because I am so often alone and because I am the subject I know best." Her early works were small, painted on tin or wood panels, inspired by Mexican retablos, devotional paintings telling stories of suffering and miracles. But Frida turned that tradition inward. Her body became the canvas, her emotions the altar. She painted herself as split, pierced, bleeding. In one painting, she's impaled by nails like a modern martyr. In another, she floats in a barren landscape, tethered to a broken column, a metaphor for her shattered spine. She painted herself weeping, fractured, decapitated, and bare, but never passive, always watching. Her pain was raw and unsanitized. She captured the ugliness of trauma with beauty, defiance, and even humor. Each painting was a reclaiming of her body, her experience, and her identity as a woman in a world that often tried to define her. But Frida wasn't just telling her story. She was inventing a new visual language, blending Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical illustration, and symbolism. Her paintings became dreamlike autopsies of her soul, framed in color, culture, and myth. By the time she could walk again, albeit painfully, Frida was no longer the girl who wanted to be a doctor. She had become an artist, and her art was unlike anything anyone had seen. She had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it into creation. Frida Kahlo didn't just paint her pain. She made the world look at it, and in doing so, turned suffering into a sacred act of self-expression. In 1928, still recovering, still painting, and only 21 years old, Frida met the man who would shape the most profound and turbulent relationship of her life, Diego Rivera. He was 20 years older, already Mexico's most famous painter. Massive in stature and presence, Rivera was a giant of Mexican muralism, known for sweeping, politically charged frescoes that told the story of the Mexican people. Frida admired his work, but now she wanted his opinion of her paintings. Interrupting his work at the Ministry of Education, she asked bluntly, "Do I have talent?" Diego looked at her work and said, "Yes, and not just out of kindness." He recognized in her something rare, an unfiltered, raw voice full of rage, irony, pain, and beauty. They began a relationship as consuming as it was creative. Frida once said, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life. One was a streetcar knocking me down. The other was Diego." They married in 1929, a strange pairing to outsiders. Diego was massive, politically famous, and unfaithful. Frida was sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, and already walking with a cane. Her parents called it a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Their bond was passionate but chaotic. Diego supported her art and encouraged her growth, but was endlessly unfaithful, even with Frida's own sister. Devastated, Frida had lovers of her own, both men and women, rumored to include Leon Trotsky and Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, but remarried a year later with new terms. Frida would keep her autonomy, home, money, and name. This second marriage was less about traditional love and more about creative partnership and mutual respect. Despite betrayals and heartbreak, Diego remained a constant force in Frida's life. He challenged her, wounded her, but also believed in her as an artist, a revolutionary, and a woman redefining what painting could be. Together, they were far from peaceful, but legendary. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York for his mural commissions. These years confronted her with American industrialism, wealth, and capitalism's contradictions. A proud Mexican nationalist and committed communist, Frida was deeply uncomfortable with the opulence she saw, especially during the Great Depression. She mocked America's materialism and obsession with appearances in letters home, missing the grit and color of Mexico. While Diego painted enormous murals on factory walls, Frida painted smaller, quieter revolutions, deeply personal works on tin and canvas. Her style grew sharper, surreal, emotional, and intimate. It was during this time she created some of her most iconic self-portraits. Frida didn't paint herself for vanity, she painted to survive. Her identity became her landscape. With a body racked by pain, surgeries, and a failed pregnancy, she turned inward. Her portraits showed her bleeding, fragmented, exposed. But her face was always calm,